so pleased that you are going to be part of the Leonard and Simon's Jewish Community Archives. This is a project that we started for the Jewish Federation to interview the leaders, the great leaders of our community, and you are certainly one of them. As I reviewed all the information about you and your husband, I thought we can't possibly get through all of this today. So what we're going to do is skim the surface and talk about what is important to you. But before we start, I have one question. Can we use the topics that we discuss as part of our historic record in the future?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, let's start at the beginning. Where were you born?
Bay City, Michigan.
And who were your parents?
Helen, Samuel Fleisher and Frida Oppenheim. They came from Europe, and we lived in Bay City, outside of Bay City, in a little town called Auburn, Michigan, where my father was in business. And we had, when we left Auburn, I was 4, and we had, I believe, 4 girls and 1 boy. And then when we moved to Detroit, my mother had another child, and my mother and dad had another child, another girl. And we lived on the east side of Detroit. And my father was in the department store business. And that is the beginning of... Shall I just stop?
Okay. You were just saying after the youngest child was born. So then you go on a different...
We had moved to Detroit, but we moved to the east side of Detroit, where my father went into business with his brothers-in-law. And it was an all-Gentile neighborhood, so I was brought up in a non-Jewish neighborhood. And I lived on the east side in various homes where my father had stores until I got married. And then after that, they moved to the Jewish neighborhood because my other sisters needed husbands, and so they decided that was the thing to do.
But was it a Jewish life on the east side for you?
It was not a Jewish life because there weren't enough Jewish people. We had a little bungalow someplace that they called the temple or synagogue. I wasn't very Jewish. I knew all of the rules and regulations of having a kosher home because my mother's mother and my father's mother lived with us. And until they passed away, she was very vigilant about that. And but then when they did pass away, she sort of let down and made it easier for herself and for us. And and then we learned the holidays. We followed all the holidays because the grandmothers taught us all of those things. But we didn't have any, long time friends from grade school or anything, and we just did the best we could. And if we could have gone to Sunday school, we could have gone to Temple Bethel, but it was a long ride on those 2-decker buses. Mm-hmm. And my mother soon got tired of driving us, and she said, "You have to go on the bus," and we said, "We're not going," and that was the end of the Jewish education and the Jewish friends, for that matter.
So what kinds of things did you do to amuse yourself when you were a youngster?
We went to school and played with the neighborhood kids, just like any other, it's like any other childhood, except when we got to be 15, 16 years old. We didn't date because my parents didn't want us not to go out with non-Jewish boys, but we soon met people through people, and then we became regular citizens of both communities.
So how did you meet your husband?
I met Paul on a Temple Bethel moonlight. That was quite an event in those days. And I was with a date on it, and he was with a group, and he was acting up and acting silly, and I thought, ugh. And then he started to call me, and he just kept calling and calling, and I said to my mother, what is it with him? He just doesn't give up. And so I finally went on a blind date with him, and there was my husband.
So what kind of person was he?
He was very, how shall I say, very ambitious, very excellent businessman, lots of ambition and stamina. And of course he had his own ideas on things, but he did very well. And then he turned to philanthropy and working in the community, and he didn't have to go to war because he was in a important business. It was making he manufactured peanut butter, and that's what the soldiers ate all practically during the war. That his business was important, and so then he went into the potato chip business and the pre-cooked bacon business and an importing business, wines, liquors, that sort of thing, and into real estate. And when he started to be more affluent, he was able to do the charitable things that he wanted to do. And he worked hard for the community, and was given many honors. And of course, I enjoyed all of the honors with him, and it was a very interesting life.
Let's go back a little. How did he get into the peanut butter business, and what was he doing when you met him?
When I met him, he was the manager. When I met him, he was worked in a warehouse for wholesale grocers. He was the head man of the warehouse, and then he met a young man from New York that was in the peanut butter business, and he thought he'd like to be his own boss, and he would like to find a business. So he became the partner of this man from New York, but the New Yorker decided he'd like to go back to New York, and he sold out to my husband, and he started his peanut butter business in a little garage off of 12th Street, downtown Detroit. And it was good peanut butter, evidently, because it went and it became the best known peanut butter in the area. And but the thing of it, he couldn't ship too far because they didn't have plastic at the time, and it was all glass. It was glass packed. And then I guess he borrowed money from some of his grocery people, friends, to get started in the business. And he just grew and grew and grew until he became what he became.
And what was your life like as a young wife?
Well, I had 2 children. I lost one child at birth, and Linda Linda Klein is my daughter, and Leonard Zuckerman, my son. They were 6.5 years apart because of the lost child in between, and I was just a mother and a stay-at-home mother, and I joined many organizations, many that were how shall I say, that were working at the time, were like, say, for example, ORT just got started, and Hadassah, and all the older ones, because I'm older, and then I just joined all of the organizations and went to the meetings. I didn't I didn't take any lead roles in it because I was busy with my husband's things too, and I had my children to take care of. And it was after my husband passed away that I got more involved in things and did things on my own and got more involved in Federation because he was doing all the Federation things, and he preferred that I just went along with him and did the things that he was interested in. And I liked that too because I didn't have to, I went lots of places that I probably wouldn't have gotten to, met a lot of people that I wouldn't have met, and all of it was very interesting. And from all over, all over the country, now I'm going into Israel. When we were taking the missions to Israel, every city would send at least 10 people that would be givers of a certain amount to go on these missions. And that was when Israel was just in its beginning. And it was the most interesting place, and how it got to where it was after the war started boggles my mind.
You have recollections from the very early
Mm-hmm.
years.
I think our first trip to Israel was if I'm not all wrong, was in '58. And that was the beginning of the missions. And we would go to Italy, go to Rome, or go to Paris, go to France, and then on to Israel, and stay in Israel on these different missions for 2 weeks. We would go on, there would be maybe 50 people or so, more or less, and we would all get on the buses and go to all the places, and the deserts, and Linda, this time, she is more knowledgeable, and there are more places that she could go to that I know you got her intake, and that she probably told you all about that. But then after Paul passed away, the family went on a couple of trips of our own where I dedicated a community center in his memory. We have different things that we bought, so to speak. Like Hebrew University has a study hall and a scholarship, and Paul was honored by Hebrew University, and it just was very, very interesting. And of course, I don't know if you want me to keep on with this. We had a home in Israel for 15 or so years, and we would go in June and October, and Paul would go in February, and we would stay for 3 weeks or 4, and it was just so peaceful, so lovely, until even after the '67 war. It was terrific just to be there and to see the progress. And but after the '73 war, everything just went downhill, and they started the holy war, the jihad, and then the Palestinians started blowing up the different restaurants and buses and killing the Jewish people and trying to ruin Jerusalem because they wanted it so badly themselves. And it's come to where it is today. I certainly hope that from what's going on, peace will come, but I'm not sure.
During the time you were in Israel, you made so many connections with the leaders there.
Yes.
And when we look around this room, we see so many of those people. Let's talk about a few of them.
Okay, sure.
Did you know Ben Gurion well?
Yes, we knew Ben Gurion. We knew Shimon and Sonia Perez and Leah and Itzhak Rabin were very good friends. And just all the government people. But we were more friendly with the top government, and Golda Meir was a very dear friend. As a matter of fact, just before we had her come to the house and bring her children from the kibbutz, and they stayed at the house for, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks, and then she had some sort of cancer, and she went into the hospital, and she died in the hospital after that visit. So we were so thrilled that she had been to the house. And as I say, she was a very dear friend. And I used to have all of the other Israelis, that not so famous ones, would come every Saturday for lunch, and a Shabbat lunch. And they'd bring their kids, and the kids would bring their bicycles and run around the house. And it was really quite a riot, but it was a great experience.
So you really became part of that country.
Right, for a while. And then after, my husband passed away shortly thereafter, and he passed away in 86. And I think that it was in 85, early 85, that was our last trip to Israel.
Let's talk about some of the other people that you knew so well, like Teddy Kollek.
Oh, Teddy Kollek, yes. Teddy and Paul, they were very, very dear friends, and we went to visit the Kolleks, and immediately they started punching at each other. That was their way
What
of
was that all about?
And even if it was in the hotel or in our home here or at his apartment, they'd wind up on the floor like two little boys wrestling. Foolishness, but they had fun. They had great times, and I still hear from Teddy.
I read that your husband was a lightweight wrestling champ. Was that?
Oh, what?
Lightweight wrestling champ. Did he ever wrestle in college or?
No.
Oh, I thought I read that. And Moshe Dayan was also one of your
Yeah.
favorites, right?
Yes, he was. He was a good friend. He was he wasn't very friendly with many people, but we would have dinner with them, and he had. I knew both his wives, Ruth and Rachel. Rachel was his second wife, and Ruth was his first wife, but we were friends with both of them. And we would have dinner with them, and we would go visit his house, and he would have big meetings. Everybody wanted to go to Moshe Dayan's house because he had like a big gallery in his backyard of things that he dug up, and his place was loaded with these antiquities, and he had a shop where he fixed them up himself, and he didn't do it in a legitimate way. He found pieces that matched fairly well, but at the museum, they don't try to fool you. They put like a putty or clay, and I have one to show you that came out of. We had a dig in our backyard, and when they were digging out all the stuff, we found one piece of sculpture that wasn't too beat up, and he insisted that they were going to give it to him, and the museum didn't want to, but he persisted and persisted. So now I have it in my living room.
So you were the benefactress of,
yes.
You and your husband
Right.
Paul were the benefactors of many of his artifacts. Right?
Yes, and we have many around the house that he just gave us. They were not harmed. They were just dug up in a hole, and he just wrote his name on it and Rachel's name. I have quite a few of those.
Also, you talked to me about some of the people in Israel that you became close to, and I remember you or Linda mentioning the little girl in Kiryat Shimona.
Yeah, Miriam. I can't remember her last name. Miriam Ohana. Yes, they were fired on from Lebanon, and it was close to the border. And Paul flew down to see if he could comfort the people. And she just clung onto his leg, and she just wouldn't let go of him. And from that time on, every time we would go to Israel, we would go to visit her, or she would come to visit us, or we even brought her here to Detroit. And do you remember, Lynn,
Mm-hmm.
when we had her here and took her all around? And she must be in her 30s or close to 40. Maybe not quite 40, but and she, while we still were going to Israel, she had 3 little children. I think she must have been 12 years old when we met her. But I no longer keep I send her a New Year's card every year and hear from her, but I don't go to Israel. I can't travel that far anymore.
And I know that you and your husband were great bridge builders, and you brought Israeli soldiers here.
Yes, we did. Do you want to hear about the soldiers?
Certainly.
Yes, they were crippled. They were disabled. The whole, as a matter of fact, the picture up there, right in the corner, are all of the soldiers from every war. There was at least one, and they visited with. They were house guests of different people in Detroit. I think there were 12 or so, or 14 of them, and Paul took them to. Paul and some of the others took them to Washington, to New York, to just the different spots of interest. And they had a wonderful time. We had a wonderful time. We had parties for them. And they were a pleasure. They really were. And it was a treat for them and a treat for us.
And what about the scholarships for the youngsters in Israel? Was that something you did as well?
We had, what we did was that we had a nursery school. That's where the little infants were, and while the mothers worked. And then they had a pre-kindergarten that we donated to them, a park in Jerusalem, scholarships. I think, did I mention at Hebrew University we had a scholarship, and study hall, and then a community center in Sde Boker. That's where Ben Gurion's home and his grave is, and it's quite a sight. I only hope that isn't part of what they're giving back. It's near the Gurion University. It's the high school of the Ben Gurion University, and that the community center is connected to, sort of like between the two. And I just different things that I can't even remember.
You know, another thing that was so important to the Jews of the world was your husband's involvement in bringing Soviet Jews out.
Yes.
And were you friendly with Scoop Jackson?
Very friendly. As a matter of fact, we have a picture of Scoop and his wife when they were planning out that I don't quite remember who the other person was that Scoop Jackson was working with on that project. But they worked out a plan, and then he also was able to get the Panoffs, the dancers, the Russian dancers, to come to Israel. I have pictures of them and a picture of them there and in different places in the house. They just needed that help, and that in those days, Russia was still the Soviet Union, and to get them out, it was a horror to get them out.
And I think your husband was so instrumental in bringing that Jackson-Vanik bill.
Yes, that's
and
I couldn't think of Vanik as to fruition. Yes.
So, and what about any other kinds of political ties within the United States? Was he involved with any of the presidents?
He was involved with the Democrats. He was not a Republican. He was a definite Democrat, and he was friendly with. And I forgot all about it. I've been to the White House several times, and I think when the different people from Israel would be guests at the White House. Rabin and Golda Meir, and just, I think I was there 3 or 4 times. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Nixon was the president at the time. During and it was in the 73 war. That's when most of that was being done. You know, I think that was the worst war, because that's the one that really killed the whole thing. It never was the same after. There was no friendship. There was nothing. And they all used to be so friendly. The Arabs and the Israelis would visit back and forth, and we would go to their homes for dinner, and the wives would be under the house where they had those houses with the sticks underneath. They would be cooking, and the husband would be waiting on table. And the wives had no part in any of the social things at all.
It was so different. And you were mentioning the 70s. That's when Paul was the chair of the UJA.
Yes.
So that was a very important time in his
was,
life.
and it just so happened it was a time to raise tons of money. They had to get out and do it, and we had a meeting here, and there were so many men. They filled up the patio in the house and everything, and raised the most they ever raised. Of course, it was the most important war, and what came out of that is what's happening now. And Sharon was the big general at the time, and then he became prime minister. It's a strange phenomenon, I think, that when the Likud party was in power, there was always trouble, except in the '67 war. Then the Labor Party was in, but it never seemed to be that there was wars or blow-ups or the car bombing and things like that. Like, not in '76, '67, not in any of the in-between wars, but that just kept the climax. That was the end. I don't know, in my mind, I can't figure out how they started to hate the Jewish, the Israelis. They felt that they didn't own anything and the Israelis owned everything. Well, that is true, because they can't make a living by themselves. They can't do anything. I don't know what's going to happen to them if they should get their state. Because Israel is the one that had all of the industry. The planes were made by Israel. They just were workers. They came over the borders and got jobs, had jobs, and had food. Now they have nothing. It's just a poor. Although I think there's a lot of monkey business there too. Like they would have an old beat-up house, but then on the hill over there, they had a great big beautiful mansion. So it wasn't all pink and roses or whatever you want to say. There was some hanky-panky going on there too. On the Palestinian side or the Arab side, but I can't figure out where the hatred came from when they were so tight and so good together.
Yeah, one of the things that you did was build that Detroit park, and wasn't that a place for Arab and Jewish children to come together and play? Yeah, we can only be hopeful that things will change for the better.
I certainly, they're trying. Sharon has made it an about turn that he tried a couple times, but I guess he just couldn't go through with it. But now, what's going to come of it, I don't know, but he is trying.
I also read that when Israel gave up the Sinai, you were there and you visited some of the families.
Mm-hmm. That's what I just pray that they don't give up more. They're giving up the Gaza Strip. I just hope that at the end of the day that Israel has a state.
Yeah, that's everybody's wish and desire. There were a few other people we didn't talk about. We were talking about political figures. One was Pat Moynihan.
He was just a very good friend. He was one of the Democratic friends of Paul, and I think they had a 25th anniversary, and they spent it in Israel, and we have a picture of Pat cleaning our pool. It's right on the desk, and he's down there. The pool is empty, and he's scrubbing with some kind of either a brush or a rake. I don't know what it is, but he's there, and they were good friends too.
I think
when he was being elected for, I think was it Senator of New York, that's when Paul went, and I went on the plane too, with another, he was in the government at the time, not right then, but when Pat got in, he was in the on the staff, and I think he was a treasurer or something, and I cannot come up with his name. He was Jewish, but he wasn't an admitted Jewish person, and but it's one of those names that I probably haven't mentioned, and I know it, but I can't think of it right now. I have a picture of him, I think.
I think after we talk, we'll walk around the room a little and maybe we'll view some of those photos, because this is such a wonderful room. And
yes, we can do that. But,
let's talk a little bit about all the wonderful things you've done in the city of Detroit too. One of the things that I was really amazed about was your involvement at the orchards and how you had the youngsters here swimming every summer.
Yes, yeah. When the orchards opened, they came to swim every Monday, and the reason that they would come Mondays was because the club was closed, and it didn't matter if they hollered and screamed and fought and jumped in the water. So they came. I think they came for about 6 or 7 years. And then the orchards decided that the children should be grateful to them for everything. And I think it was over some pop or something like that we would give them, and we had to stop, giving them drugs and then drinks and things. And then they decided that they would not let them come anymore. But we did have them for many years.
And were you involved in the orchards as a volunteer also?
Yeah.
And,
That's how I knew about being able to have them come and swim.
and after your husband died, what were some of the organizations that you became involved in?
I was just I never got deeply involved, but mostly I just belonged to them. But I got more involved in Federation, and I did fundraising for them, and I got involved in, I was even, I can't remember when I got involved in Michigan Cancer Foundation. I think my husband was involved in it, and then when he passed away, I got involved and was on the board. And I'm on the board of the DIA and the DSO and the Michigan Opera Theater, and just those were the things that I got involved with deeper than I was before Paul passed away. I did the Angels Gala for Michigan Cancer for 12 years, and it was, I think it was one of the first $1,000 dinners that Paul found out the day that we had the first party that he had bladder cancer, and he passed away. That was September the 28th or something in 85, and he passed away on the 8th of December of 86. And that happened to be Linda's birthday.
8th of January.
January, yeah. I'm thinking of my own birthday. April. Where did that come from?
And were you also very involved in Israel bonds?
Yeah, I was honored by Israel bonds, and I bought Israel bonds, and I went to their events. I wasn't a big worker, but I just did, volunteer for certain things. I didn't take on a lot. The things I mentioned, by that time I was pushing my 70s too, and I found it very interesting, especially Federation had many things that a widow can learn. They were having classes, and you learn about the laws and about the IRS and about all sorts of things that you didn't know about before, because mostly the husbands took care of all of that, and I wasn't really educated in it, but I certainly got a lot out of what Federation offered.
What were some of the challenges of being a widow? And
really wasn't. I didn't feel very challenged. I was lonely, and but I kept busy with. I went to all the events that the different charities gave, and it was all of the organizations. Today I send in the money, but I don't go. But I used to go to all of the events. They were always lovely parties, and somebody was being honored, and it was, the time has passed, and I had a few accidents that's done harm to me, and I certainly have had not too much social goings on in the past few years, and I'm trying to get back into it, but it's a little difficult.
one more thing we didn't really talk about is your love of the arts. Because if you walk through your beautiful home, you see so many.
Well, my husband was, he loved to he loved museums, and I did too, but he was even more into it than I was. And he would go to the art galleries, and he was, we had a woman next door that was an artist, and he was sort of like in a contest with her who could know more about what artist than the other person would know. And he just got interested in it. And then he'd be going to New York. He had many meetings. And he would say, what artist are you interested in? Give me a few names. And I would give him a few names, and he would go to you can name any of them in New York, and he would go and look around and bring back transparencies, and we would choose them together. And if I didn't like them, he said he liked them, he would take them to his office. But we usually agreed pretty much on what we wanted in our house, and but it just evolved.
Did you collect a lot of Israeli artists also?
Oh, yes, we have a lot of Israeli artists. I point them out, to you. There's one out there in the yard. It's a Target. It's called the Target, and there's one in the backyard on the other side. It's that's Benny Efrat, and I have one in the house, or a couple in the house, and then I have a Kadishman, who is an architect. There, behind you is a piece of sculpture, and why I have so many of them is because Paul met these two Israeli starving artists in London, and he would give them money, and they would give him pieces of art, and he would go up to visit them. And he says he's never been. Daddy was pretty warm-blooded, and he perspired a lot. But when he would go to their flats, he would freeze to death. They had no heat, nothing. And then I have a Bach painting of eggs in the hallway, and some other sculptures from in the hallway as well. I have two of that. I have the names written up someplace, but I can't remember them all. There are too many pieces.
And it's fun just to look.
Then our collection is eclectic. It isn't just modern. It isn't just any one thing. And then, of course, we have the antiquities.
Is there anything else we didn't discuss? Or Linda, would you like to ask some questions? Let's hear more about you. Oops. Let's hear more about your family, your wonderful grandchildren.
I have wonderful grandchildren. That's for sure. Well, I have, as I said, I have Linda, my daughter Linda, who is a very interested Detroiter for the community and outside the community. And I have a son, Norb. He doesn't live in Detroit. He's in Florida and Aspen. And then I have two wonderful granddaughters, but I mentioned Kathy is the oldest, and she has two adorable children, and they are, grandchildren are so wonderful. And then come the great-grandchildren. Then I have Liz, who is the second granddaughter, and John, who is the third grandchild, but the grandson. And now they all have children. John just had a nice big baby boy, and Liz has twin boys.
And what are their names?
The names of the great-grandchildren are Alex is my oldest, Abby is my second oldest, from the oldest granddaughter, sorry. And then I have Joshua and Matthew, Liz's kids, and Alex, and John just had Nate the Great. Samuel.
How old is he?
He's a few weeks old.
3 weeks old. Nathan Samuel.
Yeah, he weighed 10 pounds, 2 ounces.
Oh, he is a great
Big,
big baby.
yes. That's why we call him Nate the Great. He's a beautiful big baby. I had never seen a baby that, developed and adorable. They're all darling, and they're all smart, and it's just too bad they live in Chicago. But we do have John here.
You'll enjoy having a baby nearby.
Right.
That's for sure. Is there anything else we missed, or sometimes we ask if there's any kind of message that you would like to leave for your children or the community?
Just keep on being what they are and how they are, and just be good to each other and love each other, and that's what life is all about. And peace in the world, because it doesn't seem like there's peace anywhere. Maybe the United States isn't in any war, but I swear it's just appalling what's going on in this world, and especially the Iraqi war. It's getting so hard on everybody.
Those are good hopes and dreams, and let's hope that they come true.
Yes, I hope that they're fighting to get the troops out of Iraq, but I'll tell you, our president is fighting just as hard to keep them there.
Let's stop and let's take a little tour.
I'll be right back. That's a photograph of Paul with Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan was the big general in Israel for all of the wars, really. And he and Paul became very good friends. They both had the same type of sense of humor. And he had to be a special type of person, or you wouldn't get along with Moshe at all. And as I say, they became very good friends, and we had a very good relationship with he and his wife over all the years until he passed away. And we just enjoyed every bit of it. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. You said yes? This is a photograph of Paul with Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion was the first prime minister of Israel. He was a pistol. He really was a man with a sense of...
I think we're on the wrong picture. Which we were going to do.
We're doing
no,
the.
we were going to do.
Oh,
House in
the house in it.
the house in Caesarea.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
that's a picture, a photograph of our home in Israel. It's probably a Saturday afternoon, and I usually had a bunch of people for lunch, or we call it Shabbat lunch. And in that picture are the Panoffs, who were the Russian dancers that the whole country of America were trying to get out of Israel. And Paul was involved with in that venture, with getting them out. And so when they did finally get to Israel, they came to visit us at our house, and they really unbelievable people. They were stuck in one apartment, I think, for 3 years. They wouldn't even let them go outside in Russia. And so they were really thrilled to be free in a country where they could do what they wanted and not be like in a barrel. And we became friendly with him too. I believe that he is now the head of the big dance, whatever, ballet school in Germany, and but they still live in Israel.
Go ahead.
That's Paul's 50th birthday, and on his right is Tom Klein, our son-in-law, and on his other side is our son, Norb. They're smoking from the Turkish pipes. Paul was born in Turkey. He came to the United States at 1.5 years. The gentleman behind him was an employee of Paul's in the peanut butter plant, and he offered to get into that costume and fan them like as if they really were something. And they had a ball. Really good party.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's a photograph of Ben Gurion, the older gentleman, and Paul Zuckerman in the middle, and Golda Meir, and they're having a little conference over some argument, I guess, or some kibbutz that Ben Gurion had a sense of humor, and he would tease Paul and he would tease Golda. And there are other pictures where he's poking Golda Meir and telling her to poke Paul, and he would ask him if he could speak Turkish, and Paul would say no, and he'd say, do you speak Hebrew? And Paul would say a little, and he'd say, well, thank God for something. And he really had a strange, funny sense of humor. For as old a man as he was, he's brilliant. And he was the beginning of Israel.